The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A by-election defeat for the Tory party, reflecting what we've seen already in the polls. But is this recoverable for the Conservative Party? And what's behind it? Today we're exploring broken Britain, the energy crisis, and indeed looking in depth at the new wave of lawfare. Lawyers subjecting the government to a huge number of trials. We'll explore all of those stories after the headlines.
Hello there, good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Bethany Elsey, bringing you up to date from the GB Newsroom. Labour has retained the city of Chester in a by-election.
Samantha Kate Dixon has been duly elected as the Member of Parliament for the city of Chester.
Former leader of Chester City Council, Samantha Dixon, is the winning candidate. She's increased the party's majority by more than 4,000 to almost 11,000. The contest was triggered by the resignation of former Labour MP Christian Matheson after a parliamentary watchdog upheld complaints of serious sexual harassment. He denies the allegations. A committee of MPs is warning the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary sets a dangerous precedent after she resigned for breaching the ministerial code in October. Ms Braverman was forced to step down from Liz Truss's cabinet after sharing a sensitive document from a personal email without permission. She was given a job back 6 days later. The Public Administration and Consultation Affairs Committee says the system for upholding standards should be more robust. 2 teenage boys have been charged with the murders of 2 16-year-olds just a mile apart in south-east London. Kern Solanke was stabbed in Thamesmead and Charlie Bartolo was found with stab wounds in Abbeywood last month. Despite efforts by emergency services to save the pair, both teenagers were pronounced dead. The Metropolitan Police said the boys aged 15 and 16 will appear at Bromley Magistrates Court later today. And Sir Elton John has been announced as the first headline act for Glastonbury Festival next year. Organisers say it'll be the final UK show of Sir Elton's last ever tour. The star said he couldn't be more excited and that there's no more fitting way to say goodbye to British fans. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, first today, to briefly dwell on the results of last night's by-election. The city of Chester was held by the Labour Party with an increased majority following the resignation of Chris Matheson MP, following those sexual misconduct allegations. Matheson won the seat for Labour with 50% of the vote in 2019, and this new MP, Samantha Dixon, increased this share to 61% last night. Well, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper spoke to voters in the constituencies about their voting priorities yesterday.
I'd like to see the town a lot cleaner than it is, and also there are too many empty shops and they need to be filled.
To improve the environment, to unfortunately reduce the dependency on motor cars.
They've got to ensure that rents and rates are right for the town, because it's a leisure and commercial centre. So those have got to be sorted out so that the shops are filled. There are too many voids in this town.
Well, there's so much that needs doing, but I don't think they'll bother doing it because one party's the same as the other. We're not being levelled up here at all. It's just words levelling up. They don't carry out what they say they're going to do. They just talk the talk, they don't walk the walk.
Wise words there. Well, whether or not any party would address the issues raised by the people of Chester in the way that they want is an open question. But it's clear that last night it wasn't a good result for the Tories. A 14% swing is a solid result for the Labour Party, although it doesn't quite match the 20-point-plus swings we saw when Tony Blair was leader of the opposition. It's also a slightly lower swing than implied by the polls, when usually we might expect a by-election to deliver a slightly larger swing than the polls imply. Frankly, what can we take from all of this? Well, Labour are on course for a general election win, but perhaps not an election win on a scale comparable to 1997. But why is the Labour Party ahead in the polls? Well, one reason is because Britain feels a bit broken. High inflation, strikes, crumbling services and a record-high tax burden to boot. When things feel this way, people often default for whoever is in opposition. Some people are comparing the winter of 2022 to the winter of 1979, the winter of discontent. But how can a country with such a historically high levels of taxation and spending deliver so little in return? Well, joining me now is Dr. Madsen Piri, president of the Adam Smith Institute, who has this week written a paper entitled Broken Britain, 16 Problems Facing the Country.
It's a lot more than 16.
It's a lot.
We didn't want the paper to be too big, so we just picked out the top 16.
And what's the common theme within all of these problems that the country sort of feels a bit stuttering right now?
It is like the 1970s. You mentioned the winter of discontent. OK, so we have loads of strikes every day. We have high inflation, cost of living crisis. Yes, we had all that. But there was another thing about 1979. Nothing worked. And we're back there again. Nothing in Britain works. The NHS doesn't work, education doesn't work. The Bank of England, supposed to keep inflation at 2%, let it go to over 10%. It's broken. Everything's broken. Transport's broken. Housing is broken. We picked out the top 16. Nothing in Britain works anymore.
It's a very, very bleak prospectus, but I suppose the exercise in terms of pointing out everything that is broken and the way in which it's broken, by doing that, perhaps we can learn how to fix it. Does your paper suggest any ways in which we need to tackle these big problems?
No, like Harry and Meghan, I'm bringing out a sequel, and that sequel will be Fixing Broken Britain. But nothing in this paper simply identifies all the problems. But I think most people out in the country are already aware of that. They try to catch a bus and there isn't one. They try to catch a train and it's cancelled. They try to get a good school place for their kid and they can't. Everyone knows that things just aren't working. Even the government isn't working.
Why are things not working? Because, as you point out in the paper, we have the highest levels of taxation on record. We spend more on, for example, healthcare than we've ever spent before,
and yet,
but we're not getting the results.
Where's the output? Queues of ambulances waiting for hours to get people into A&E. 4,000 people every day have to wait more than 12 hours at A&E before they get attended to. Where's the money going? Well, About a third of the people in the NHS are actually employed in medical care, doctors and nurses. It's too heavy with bureaucracy. And the same is true of the civil service. And the same is true almost everywhere. Britain doesn't work. There's no one at the top with management skills to say, right, we're cutting out 7 layers of bureaucracy, we're going to do efficient practices, we're going to do this. No one does it. Nobody seems to care anymore.
You point out in the paper that there's something called treasury mindset, where people are more focused on sort of abacus economics than delivering growth or change or perhaps more radical solutions.
Yes,
was Liz Truss therefore right, in your view, to sort of want to take on those elements of the state? And might she have, if she was allowed to by her own backbenchers, might she have provided a solution?
Well, someone certainly needs to take on the Treasury mindset. They are concerned with they're concerned with interest rates, with exchange rates. But what about the money supply? They're supposed to keep the money supply down so that we only get 2% inflation. They let it go. In the first round of quantitative easing, the money was more or less anaesthetised in bank vaults. It didn't leak into spending, so it didn't cause inflation. But in the second round, it was used for furlough, eat out to help out. It went straight into spending, and guess what's happened to inflation? So we certainly need someone to change that mindset. Could Liz Truss have done it? Yes, I think maybe she could. But she didn't have the support of the MPs. The problem with the Tory party is you tend to elect leaders who are popular in the country, but not in Parliament. And if Boris had stood again and won again, he would have been popular in the country, but he wouldn't have had the support of the MPs, which is probably why he didn't stand.
So is this an intractable problem, then? There are some solutions that are visible out there, whether it's restricting the money supply to keep inflation low, perhaps raising interest rates to keep inflation low. These are unpopular things. Similarly, big planning reform, that would clearly boost growth, but some communities don't want it. Is there simply a problem here that whenever someone tries to do something to fix these problems, they run up against all of these institutional barriers?
That is exactly the case. For example, we need more housing. We all know we need more housing. But many Tory MPs representing rural and county constituencies are faced with an electorate that doesn't want any more houses in their area. They're not NIMBYs, they're bananas. They build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. Bananas. And they oppose all building of all housing. And how do the Tories overcome that? Their backbenchers want to get re-elected, and therefore they want the support of those constituents who oppose house building. So you are right, there are intractable problems that simply can't be overcome.
Liz Truss named something called an anti-growth coalition, and she pointed to the SNP, the Lib Dems, the Labour Party. I posit to you that there's quite a lot of the anti-growth coalition within the Conservative Party as well.
She should have looked behind her when she said that from the front bench, because behind her is a large element of the anti-growth. They won't say that they oppose growth, but they oppose the policies that could stimulate growth.
Well, Dr. Piri, it's been an absolutely fascinating and indeed depressing way to start my Friday morning. Thank you so much for talking through your new paper on terms of broken Britain, 16 problems facing the country. We'll have to get you back when you come up with the solutions so desperately needed. Well, moving on today, this week Business Secretary Grant Shapps travelled to Suffolk to dot the I's and cross the T's to deliver £700 million of state investment, taxpayers' money, into a nuclear project, Sizewell C. The first such investment in new nuclear in 30 years. This comes as the onshore wind rebellion in Parliament gathers pace. This week I revealed that former Levelling Up Secretary Simon Clarke has enough Tory MPs signed up to his amendment now to overturn the government's majority and overturn that ban on onshore wind. This includes Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And yet we faced a warning this week of energy rationing too. So where are we when it comes to security of supply? Well, I'm pleased to be joined now by Angela Knight, the former Treasury Minister and former head of Energy UK. And Angela, first of all, this sort of semi-warning that we had from the National Grid earlier this week about whether or not there would be a voluntary form of rationing taking place. Where are we with that?
Well, we've not gone there is the answer. The issue, I think, as far as National Grid was concerned, is they were looking at a week ahead, they were looking at the weather, and they were looking to see what was needed in respect of energy for this country. And where they would normally have gone under those circumstances, if it was going to be as cold as it has been, or colder, and if it was going to be windless, and it hasn't been that windless, then our normal situation would be we would take some power from one or other of our interconnectors. The main problem, though, with the interconnectors at the moment is not that they don't work, they do, but those who feed the interconnectors, which is predominantly France, have got very big troubles with their own power stations. About half their power stations at the moment are down, they're out of action. So France, which is the great exporter of electricity across Europe, is not being much of an exporter at the moment. Now, I think what National Grid's got to do is really rework its sums on the basis that those interconnectors are hardly going to be there this winter. And that means that we need to put on standby everything else we've got, which includes the coal-fired power stations that are still there. This business, though, of saying, there's problems ahead or whatever, is not new. It's just that right now, I think we're terribly sensitized, and hardly surprising, we're terribly sensitized for every little bit and piece and nuance that comes out of either the regulator or National Grid or the power companies or governments or whatever. So somehow they need to actually construct their story a little bit better, so we don't all get really concerned about something that may not be run-of-the-mill, but is, for all that, relatively normal.
Right. I suppose it is a big concern that in this winter of all winters, the live energy import that we would ordinarily rely upon is not going to be there. But looking to the future now, should we be talking about new nuclear power in the way that we are? Because the government likes to trumpet this new nuclear investment as if it's going to be bringing on a lot more energy to the grid. In reality, this is just replacing what we're losing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I'm just going to pick you up on something, if I may, because you say, and I can see it on the screen, that Sizewell C first significant funding for nuclear in 30 years. Well, hang on, Hinkley Point is being built at the moment, and Hinkley Point is due to be ready in a couple of years' time.
I think it's the way in which the state investment has been delivered this time that's the new thing in this 30 years.
That is correct, because what has happened is that with Sizewell, the UK government has in effect bought out the Chinese involvement. But whether we are talking about Sizewell or indeed Hinkley, and I think it's arguable, they are being financed in different ways. Ultimately, it all ends up on us, actually, the consumer, the taxpayer. But these are very big, long-term projects. They take a lot of money to build. Hinkley is 2-3 years over, but it's likely to be in production in 2027, and Sizewell presumably sometime in the mid-30s. Meanwhile, as you rightly say, we are steadily closing down some of our old nuclear power. So the big question is, what do we do for the short and medium term? Because the Sizewells and the Hinkleys are for the long term. And the answer to that question is we absolutely need to focus on what I call base load. That is electricity that's going to be there regardless of the climate, regardless of what's happening with the wind, regardless of what's happening with the sun or whatever. And that is the small-scale nuclear power stations, the one that you can build in a couple of years and it costs a couple of billion. Now, a couple of billion is still a big sum, but when you can build something that quickly and at that amount of money, that means that, investment funds, private investment, pension funds, whatever, can all come in.
So just very, very briefly, if you will, Angela Knight, how close are we to these small modular reactors? How far along is Rolls-Royce in their development of this technology?
Well, it's ready, effectively. And as I understand it, there's applications in for two things. One is to get, your formalised approvals from the relevant authorities. And I should say, parenthesis, that, of course, Rolls-Royce has been building nuclear for some years. We have nuclear in our submarines, for example. So it's been doing those small-scale plants, albeit in a slightly different version. So it's in for the approvals. From the authorities, and also, as I understand it, it's applied for 6 or 7 sites to build them on, which are the former nuclear power station sites.
Yes.
So you've got all the infrastructure there.
That is really interesting. I had no idea it was quite so far ahead. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there to squeeze in one more story today. But Angela Knight, thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. Some good news on energy after all at the end there. Well, now, finally today, the self-styled Good Law Project, led by the eccentric celebrity lawyer Jolyon Morn, is an activist group of lawyers who like to take the government to court on a variety of matters. Whether it's litigating Brexit or trying to stop ministers using WhatsApp Messenger, these lawyers routinely take action to make the government's life difficult. Well, yesterday, Jolyon lost. But what does this constant lawfare against the government say about how our legal system has become weaponised, indeed politicised? Well, the barrister Stephen Barrett has an excellent piece in The Spectator this week dealing with this very topic, and I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen himself now. So let's just firstly speak on this latest case in a series of long cases. What was the Good Law Project trying to do?
So effectively, they wanted to stop ministers from using WhatsApp. And there was a complaint that a prime minister had also used a private email address to email back and forth copies of a speech that they wanted to give. What we might think of as perfectly normal use of the internet. And the idea was to get the court to say that that was somehow scandalous and wrong.
It does seem that the Good Law Project tries to go for the sort of media headline, government has broken law in one way or another, when often this is very technical and perhaps not that consequential.
Yes. Well, a point, it's quite funny. So 20 years ago, we sort of banned Latin in law. And you can see why we do that. There are all sorts of, we ought to be accessible and the rest of it. But one of the fundamental principles we had was de minimis non curat lex. And that basically just meant that small things are not the concern of the law. Little technical breaches of rules, we don't care. That's effectively what de minimis non curat lex means. It's just, it's bringing in a level of proportionality to law. And it seems that with throwing out Latin, we've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And society, the public, the non-lawyers, are being told that all sorts of rule breaches are phenomenally important and desperately exciting. And that's not true. And the pushback is starting, but it matters that people pay attention because, of course, this case, and this is a point I make in the article, merely by announcing that you're suing the government, you get an awful lot of attention. And nobody waits really until this point, the end point, when actually they lose. Everybody gets terribly excited at the start. They assume that they're only suing the government because they're going to win, and a lot of drama is given to them. We all have a duty in our society to sort of calm down, let the court do its job, and wait until this point to see whether or not we get excited or not excited. We are moving towards...
Briefly, if you will, Stephen Barrett, how did they lose? Why did the judges throw out this case?
Well, so for a start, their arguments were quite eccentric. I mean, there is a duty on the government to preserve some records for the future so that the future historians can understand what was going on. But you don't have to preserve everything. And it's for professionals to make the decision on what has to be preserved. As a minister walks around in a day, they might ask for a coffee to a minor aid. That's not going to be recorded. It doesn't need to go in the National Archives. So first of all, there was an attempt to blow up that rule that just protects future archives into something that it isn't. And then there was an attempt to argue that, there are policies and guidance must be binding as law. And this is a very, very bad way to make law. It's a really, really bad idea because instead of laws being made in Parliament and us all knowing what they are, they're made sort of in secret by a civil servant. And the court thankfully said no.
Well, let's hope that this happens more often, because it does seem that sort of activists are taking more and more to use the law to sort of make political points when it really should be something very different. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme now, but Stephen Barrett, always fascinating to hear your arguments, and I do recommend for people to seek out that article in The Spectator this week. That's it from me today. Coming up, it's Esther and Phil, so stick around for that for the next 2 hours. But join me again on Monday at 9:30. Before then, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Foggy for many of us once again this morning, but brighter skies are on their way later. Unlike yesterday when the fog didn't clear in places, today the fog will lift, because what's happening is the isobars across the map are now tightening up around the periphery of a large area of high pressure to the east, and that will bring an increased easterly breeze through the day. So that's going to make it feel colder through the next few days, but it will also help to lift the mist and fog that we've got around first thing. So after poor visibility on the roads during the morning, the fog does lift by the afternoon. The easterly breeze is still bringing a fair amount of cloud in. I don't think there'll be much sunshine, but there will be some sun coming through Northern Ireland, West Wales, Cornwall, as well as parts of North East England. There'll also be some showers into the east coast of England, but it will feel cold with the wind, 5 to 9 Celsius, and when you add on the wind, well, you can take off a few degrees for the wind chill effect. A lot of cloud for Scotland and some patchy rain clearing the far north of Scotland, but otherwise it's mostly a dry picture. And for many places, it's a fine end to the week. There'll be no fog forming on Friday night, but there will be a lot of cloud feeding in and further showers into eastern and central areas. Clear spells to the west,